I want to mention something about my body of life again, based upon getting notes from some of the people out of town and from some of you newer people. Let me stress for you again that this is not a parable. Now, it is a map, and it is the best, most useful, contemporaneous template that I know of. But the kinds of questions and notes that I get at times from some of the newer people still reflects part of the little situation I have mentioned to you on several occasions of me trying with you group of people not to be mystical and distant to an unprofitable degree. And so hence some of the newer people, as many of you remember, are going through almost a feeling, as reflected at least verbally, that some of what I may be saying is some kind of conjecture, or that I am in some way engaged in a running discovery or some kind of debate of me asking you these rhetorical questions. And some of the newer people want to treat it on the basis as though it's open to some kind of great discussion, or maybe I'm fumbling around in the dark in some way. Now, there's more real interest extant here than simply some theoretical question of how I should be relating to people who are still being attracted to this, well, it's on this low level, this rather closed level. But let me point out again certain aspects of how this has always gone as far as the public is concerned. What you hear about, if we take all the famous people, or any of the famous people, again using them as archetypical examples, and it doesn't matter whether anyone lived with that name or not, but a Moses, what you read and what is considered to be the fount of Judaism, for instance. If you go back and read the Old Testament, or if you remember any of your upbringing in whatever religion, people like Moses, he comes back, comes to a group of people the way it gets reported, and he tells them, I have been talking to the gods, and they told me the following, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't make a mistake. Or Muhammad said that, he had a photogenic memory. I never did think he was that handsome, but they say that thank you. They say that the gods told me this, and then they say, la 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 la, thou shalt not. All the prophets of the Bible, all the prophets of all religions, all the Jesuses, the Buddhas do not, as far as is reported, do not ask now, at a later date, they do not ask the would-be followers rhetorical questions. It's simply, here are the facts. Now, you should note within yourself, you don't have to simply look out at life, but since that's the way it is, then remember, it wouldn't be that way unless that's the way it should be. But you should be able to see within yourself again what I pointed out, that the way this has ended up, as it's gone along, is not like most of you expected it in the beginning, to say the least. Now, once it gets outside this area, this limited area in which I'm operating now, and this is, as I've told you, about it, then you cannot operate with large groups of people. It's not just numbers, but I just use that as a shorthand. You cannot operate on this kind of basis that we could describe right now, just amongst ourselves, now that most of you know better, as being rather vague, open-ended, me even asking questions, me playing some of the showbiz of playing like I just thought of something while I'm standing here, or saying, could that be true? Please think back into your own nervous system. What would rabbis be doing for a living today had Moses come back and said, hey, I think I heard voices. Just fooling, I'm not going crazy. And then see how that went down, and then maybe say, but I did have some very strange thoughts. Or if it's Jesus, tried to talk to a crowd of people the way I talk to you of late. You think now that we would have Jerry Falwells and Billy Grahams. They'd be out working for a living like everyone else. There'd be no Christianity. It has to be on the basis that the gods told me this, and here it is. Short and sweet and to the point. I will also assure you, I've at least hinted, it's no great secret, but I can assure you that there were a small group of people that Moses came down to. I'm using the biblical description of him going somewhere and then coming back. But there was a small group of people that he talked to, and in some way, although it was a different time and place, and I'm not going to try and literally give you probably what was said, but it had to be somewhat on this basis of him saying, talking to them a certain way, and then eventually saying, all right, if this is going any further, we cannot stop here. Enough of you got this, and I'm going to have to go out there and tell these people that I went up on a mountain where I got a special delivery letter from God personally, and he laid it out quite clearly, and I got to tell them that. And the same thing with all these other prophets, all these supposedly more enlightened or awakened people that in some way attributed all this to gods. There was a group somewhere, prior to of history hearing of them, he talked to them in one way, and then just told them, right, hold on to your diapers because I've got to now go talk to a group of people, and I can't talk to them this way. And so I'm going to be telling them that burning bushes talk to me, God popped out of a cave, and don't you people bat an eye. But what I have used that I keep insisting to you is not simply a fly-by-night synonymous picture for your forefathers' idea of God. The body of life and us living in it, once you see it as an extension, it is it's easy enough for me to say now it is a predictable extension. It wasn't easy enough for me to say that until I knew it. It wasn't easy enough, if you nod along now, for you to do that unless you'd ever heard it from me. But it is not simply a play on words. I've done it to you so slowly that most of you missed a kind of gap wherein you're feeling before you got involved with this, if there was some kind of extraordinary knowledge or activity that had always been available. It came from outside ordinary life. You're just sure of that. That feeling is already wired in. And of course it is true it comes outside the ordinary line level consciousness, but it does not come outside of life. There is no outside of life unless you find out otherwise yourself. That you are in the midst of it, including what has always been man's dreams of gods, that it is inside of the same body where you are. But then what also helped make this very accommodating as a template is what I use periodically of science. Of it now in the last several generations being an accepted notion among at least fairly intelligent people that time and space, for instance, as they call it, are open to further interpretations as opposed to here's a locale and there's a locale and they can't meet. Or 1922 was one time and 1985 is another time. And it's gone in some kind of progression and you can't take the two and put them together. Wherein, if you get into astrophysics, then you get into those kind of questions that have not, of course, led science to any place in particular, but the idea that times do not exist in that kind of way separately. So what would be one time here and appear to be another time somewhere else is limited to your ability to perceive it. What you could be perceiving, either through your natural senses or through man-made technology. What you're perceiving may in fact no longer exist. Well, in the body of life, once you begin to see it for yourself, once you begin to be able to use this, is a kind of diffusion, the kind of confusion, wherein nothing seems to fit. Once you begin to have your own notion, a correct notion, by using this as a beginning, that what seems to be going on in one place that by any perception I can muster would seem to be destructive, would seem to be going nowhere of any creative or with any creative thrust, is not a total statement of any reality. And its prior and its post situations are simultaneously existing somewhere in life's body. And whatever your consciousness is drawn to in one place is no statement of reality. And that which would appear to be a cancer, that which would appear to be an illness in the body of life in one place, could already be being cured in another place. It could have been cured before it happened. Along a very vague fault line to this, let me point out to you that human life is normally a very localized affair. That is, that people are wired up normally to live, to exist in a very small, localized area. Now, you should be able to feel this when you get down to the red level, to the red circuit people in you. I am aware that psychology, biology has played around with ideas all the way from the animal kingdom into what they would call psychological areas of human behavior, into territories. But all of you should have a feeling, there's more to it than this, I was not going into it much further tonight, but there is a level in you, and it's the red circuit level, that has a desire, it is already wired up that way, to live in a very small and specific locale. Its territory. It is no longer, in our day and time, much of a wanderer. There is a way in which you can feel it at the blue level. To give you some hint, it would be habitual behavior. The reoccurring patterns of apparent feeling, a limitation of experience, wherein nothing surprising happens. In the yellow area, which in a sense is of more importance to people pursuing this, is the discovery, this gigantic, huge discovery that is child's play, wherein one stops pursuing occult books, quits taking one's own daydreams as being a statement of what one understands, and to find out that right here, the only laboratory, the only book you need, there is a minute repertoire of what seems to be thoughts, what seems to be daydreams. But they cannot explain themselves, nor can they tell you what they're going to say next. Ordinarily, people are wired up in such a way that ordinary existence is a very localized affair. I'm going to leave that until I give you the final chorus for the night and see if you can remember that there's some connection between this and something else. Paragraph 3. A little more about the voices that I started several weeks ago. To give you a question that you should have enough ammunition to be able to follow some of this on your own, is to ask you, what are you going to listen to in life? And let me describe two big general areas just a little bit more than I did previously coming from life. That there is a place within life that is like multitudinal voices, and they come from the lower circuits of life. And it is from this area, if you can see it in a certain way, I could say that this is the origins of the Tower of Babel. I remind you before I get to it again tonight of the strength of diversity. But people are wired up to hear the lower circuit voices of life. And from this area are a multitude of voices. It is wherein exists every yes and every no, every this way as opposed to every that way. It is where all schisms exist. It is the origins of all evil, such as the Democrats and Republicans. I couldn't resist a little joke, could I? Everywhere that you can find things are divided. This is the lower circuits of life speaking. The other possibility is whether you're listening to a higher single voice. Let me try to put it into some more specific direction vis-a-vis some of the maps and descriptions I've given. You could look at ordinary human consciousness in this way. Ordinary, line-level consciousness is as though it were existing in life's red and blue circuits. But looking back upon life itself, the body of life having its own nervous system, then within its red and blue departments, at its red and blue levels, is where you still find line-level consciousness of humanity. That is where you find a diversity to the point, I'm calling it confusion. What I'm trying to get you to see is it's ordinary consciousness, wherein no one understands anything. Because everybody can prove that God must exist, then somebody else can prove to you that God doesn't exist. Or somebody can prove to you that 2 and 2 is 4, give them enough string, and somebody can prove to you that 2 and 2 has got to be something other than 4. As opposed to that kind of multitudinal voices coming from the lower circuits, would be looking at this as if it were touching life's own yellow circuit. I suggest to you that there is a direct parallel to what you should have already observed within yourself. It is not the red circuit that can any longer expand and grow. It is not anything, there is not anything possible that can be done to the red circuit that will make anyone more conscious, that will still any mechanical voices while honing and refining a single voice, nor can it be done any longer through the blue circuit. That the only place now left to grow in any measurable, meaningful way is the yellow circuit in man. And what I am hinting to you most strongly, to say the least, is that there's a similar situation, although if we were capable of perceiving life's own nervous system in such a way we could talk differently, then of course I would have to use different terminology, or if you could see it, it wouldn't be important for me to describe it. So I can't literally tell you that life's own nervous system is exactly like man's, but it is comparable. And it is no longer growing, not in any place that has any meaning for us, in its red and blue level. I've also given you little hints. You may have thought I was just being funny, of humanity waiting to be discovered by some advanced race of people from other planets, or for astronomers to find another planet that seems to be populated. It's now only guesswork of them thinking that other planets are in fact being born. And I would suggest to you that that is open to some further investigation as to whether the universe, as they call it, can actually grow anymore on its red circuit level or on its blue circuit level. But taking the map of the body of life. There is the multitude of voices that life continues to speak with, and it speaks at the ordinary line level consciousness of ordinary humanity. When it speaks, humanity moves. In the dream of a one world, happening any day now, a dream of a utopia showing up in 1540, in 1679, in 1722, the dream that all the diversities of religions and cultures, political opinions will cease. You note that it has not ceased, and as you're beginning to discover for yourself, there is a purpose for it. It is not an ill of life, not yet. It is not evil, as of yet. But ordinary people, relatively ordinary people, that believe that they want to be philosophers or that have tried to read mystical books and they can't find where to go. That it seems as though indeed the Tower of Babel was not just a biblical fairy tale, that the whole world, at least in bits and pieces, is mad. That no one person knows everything. That anytime you get into an inquiry into any field, it immediately splits itself up into at least two camps for your attention, for your consideration, as to their opinion. And so, ordinary humanity could take as being their anti-anthem is all is confusion. Nobody really knows anything, which of course is not true. Life knows everything. But if you're going to listen to the voices of the lower circuit, if you're going to listen to what is going on, what messages are available at line level, then the best word in the world is confusion. Wherein that has always seemed to be mystical states to people that they have attributed to the gods, all the way up to and including the moments that I have referred to as getting the nervous system activated above the line, getting a glimpse of something, being able to see into life itself for some short period of time. Another way to look at that, a quite proper description is, those of you that have experienced it, it's as though suddenly all of the extraneous noise, all the multitudes, everything went quiet and there was one single voice. Of course, your forefathers would have said, if it ever happened to you in some way accidentally before you met me, you would have said, holy shit, God talked to me. It's just as certain. I could suddenly see. It went on for almost a day. I saw what was going on. There was no question. I was not in some induced form of fanaticism. I could still operate, move about. But everything I looked at, I saw what was going on. I knew what was going on. There was no confusion. There was no internal debate. Everything I saw was simple and direct. To use the picture I'm drawing for you right now, that is a single higher voice that is coming from a different place in life's nervous system. It speaks to you in a different place in your own nervous system. Another little something. Let me give you, I'll make up a new term for you. How about the willful, homeostatic self-stabilization? It's just something I've talked about for a long time and given you pieces of tricks and tasks to do. But let me give you a quick verbal pill of this. Since many of you are already stumbling or walking around doing it to varying degrees, it is like a direct, constant checking on the total organism that is you. Now, it is not some kind of mechanical I use everyday terminology now, this kind of self-consciousness that ordinary people say that they have, and it surely is of some benefit, that I am very self-conscious. I worry about the way I look. I worry about the way I speak. I'm always being concerned about what other people may be saying about me. I try to improve my wardrobe. I try to improve my manners. I try to improve the way in which I can deal with people, because I am very self-conscious. I'm aware of biting my fingernails. I'm aware if I get half a pound overweight. It is not that. Everyone does that, whether they call it by any names or descriptions I've just used or not. That is part of that kind of necessary tensile strength between everyone. It shows the tenor of the muscles, the nervous system of life itself. But it is quite mechanical. Everyone does it. This is a willful act, and it has to be almost with no purpose as far as you can tell to begin with. But it is a continual checking, and I'll give you just a further detailing of it, or a way that you can approach it. One part of it is a continual checking to see that the red level is steady. And another way I could describe the rest of it, or another part of it for the evening, is a parallel checking that the blue and the yellow circuits are as open as possible and striving for maximum height. Another detailing of the difference between this, if anyone needs any further verbal maps, between this and that kind of ordinary self-consciousness, is this kind of willful homeostatic self-stabilization. This continual checking is not in any way a negative or a stressful operation. That is, me saying that part of the checking is that the red level is steady. It is not this thing of worrying about one's health, for instance. It is not that everybody does to some degree. The extreme joke I normally use is people nowadays buying their own gauge to check their blood pressure in the office once or twice a day, or to check their temperature, and to subscribe to medical journals, and to read what the latest hip new disease is. It is not that. That is what takes place in ordinary people. And if they don't do that, of course, they worry about dying, which is the same thing. Just one has more side costs than the other one. It is not stressful. It is not negative. It is not in any way fearful. It is, as opposed to that, it would be more like a pleasurable, continual responsibility of a wise overseer vis-a-vis his dutiful employees. But it is not stressful. On the contrary, it's on the contrary. It is not mechanical self-analyzation. As I have said, I hate to use the word, but there is no word for it because you have to understand it. But it is as close as possible to what should be the true understanding of the word, impartial. And it takes someone out of the ordinary, of course, to approach this in the slightest, because you have to do it almost with no purpose, because you're not analyzing yourself on the basis of how do I look to other people? Am I making the right impression? It is a stabilization. It is a continual checking, but of nothing mechanical, other than, first off, the red circuit is steady, which falls within, those of you that have good memory and keeping notes, that falls within my great medical dictum of fuck health. You just have to be aware, such as, well, I have not been drinking 10 cups of coffee a day, and it's affecting the whole system. Or I haven't fallen back to having 2 martinis every day. ordinary people, it's of no consequence. But simply do this, if I took away, every little restriction, then any of you that belong in this, if I say, all right, everybody, you can drink or do whatever you want to, because now it doesn't matter anymore. And let's say that you fell back in the habit of drinking a couple of martinis every day. If you belong in this, it wouldn't take you but perhaps a fortnight. And if you belong in this, it would strike you as, I can't operate correctly. You would simply understand, I can't do this. It is that kind of checking. It is not a self-analyzation that would have nothing to do with morality of, ooh, I'm beginning to feel like I'm going crazy like I did 10 years ago. It's God's message to me about drinking. The Baptists were right. My mother was right. It's got nothing to do with that. That's all mechanical. It'd be simply almost an impartial awareness. That is, there's no particular reason, because you're not trying any longer to be a good Baptist or to make your mother happy. It is simply you're aware that I can't do this. This is affecting everything in me directly. I can't do it. That is the checking that the red level is steady. The other aspect, I could have cut it up into other sections, but I'll leave it tonight. The other section I mentioned, I'm going to leave with you, is after that. That is a continual checking. I'm not doing anything over which I have any understanding and control that is upsetting the red level. Getting proper exercise, I'm feeling the body movement. I am not unsettling it. Then after that is in the blue and the yellow circuit, that they are as open as possible and striving for the maximum height. That, I say I'll leave with you, but I told you all about it before, haven't I? All right, I'm going to hit you with a few things about words. Some of the newer people in other cities getting these tapes and so forth, and of course you people. You should have your memory about you and now. That many people for a while took some of what I said, which was not totally unintended, for a while in certain areas as being direct attacks on words, like excessive talk. Words cannot enlighten one. Me making jokes about the last time I read a book. There was a purpose, and I'm aware that some people even now, not necessarily here, but some of the newer people, still accept some of it as being some kind of would-be righteous attack on words. So, as always, once you think that maybe you have really latched onto something, I have got to disavow you as much as possible of that canard. And I think you'll find my explanations to be ducky. Even those of you newer people that think that has been some kind of direct attack and that perhaps I'm trying to push you somewhere to where you do not operate verbally, me even making jokes about me talking, me telling you that, all right, here, I'm going to tell you something, but forget it. That, it's just pointing to something, and what I'm about to tell you is as close as I can, but it's not really the truth. Now, words are not that bad. If you care to ponder such things as this, you would not have gotten what have you gotten out of this thus far had it not been for words. That's not all it was, but had it not been for words, none of this would have happened. And something else I have thrown around, a few of you have heard, is the time has come, it's been a gradual process, and it's not all or nothing right now, but words have become deeds. Words are no longer just words. Now, not all the time, because there's plenty of times that words are just words. But I was going to talk a little about ways in which they're not just words. Let us take what would appear to be a kind of self-help medical clinic, psychological clinic. Now that they advertise, we all have the same exposure to them advertising, but you're aware of the fact that maybe they're talking about destructive habitual behavior. You know, come over to Sam's mental health clinic. And specials on the weekends, you're in slow time. But they point out that here at Sam's clinic, well, the word now they like to use holistic, but they say, we don't just treat symptoms and etc. They say what we do is attempt to treat the whole person. That is, we treat the patient both physically and psychologically. Now, it's all been a growing, expanding process, and they don't fully understand it, of course, or they'd be saying the things I've been saying to you. So in a sense, they do not understand what they're doing to the same level that most of you do now on a good day. But they are stating the situation correctly in that words can be medicine. Words can actually be biochemical medicine. But right now, since everything is always in a transition, here's what humanity is faced with. And this has been a process, I could pick you out examples, whether I'm stretching it or not, of thousands of years ago, where this was already popping up and humanity was already talking about it. Life was already mumbling to itself. But there's been an increasing process, and that words now, more often than yesterday, have the ability to be a biochemical medicine themselves. But speaking of line level consciousness of ordinary people, we're still left with this, by and large, of taking words as being pills. Is that once people are hardwired and programmed, the ability to metabolize new medication is sorely, sorely limited. That is, I present to you, an absolute scientific fact. If any of you would like any at least suggested proof, it's the absolute lack of predictability and results in psychotherapy. There are now large numbers of people alive on this planet that say, and it is in their system enough that you would have to mistreat them in lower circuits to make them deny this, that they have been almost resurrected from the living dead by talking therapy, by being in analysis. And of course, for many years, people have said, I have been brought back from the brink of destruction, of absolute, abject despair of being alive, by being converted to this religion, by talking to this rabbi, this minister, that words seem to act as though they were medicine. But it cannot be predicted. The results are very, very sketchy. Everyone from rabbis to psychiatrists will admit, anyone who is operating at the normal mechanical level of those two areas of life's body will admit, I can't explain to you what happens, and I can't explain to you why sometimes it works and why it doesn't sometimes. Those of the cloth will say, of course, God works in weird ways. Sometimes he helps people, sometimes he doesn't. Psychiatrists would say, well, we're still a relatively young art, not yet a science. There are too many variables. We can't predict results. We can't guarantee results. There's no explaining it. Well, I have explained it to you. that words can act as literal biochemical medication. But once anyone, which is everyone, is wired up and programmed, their ability to metabolize any new medication, that is, they've already become what they've become, and to tell them, listen, don't despair, the gods love you. For over a period of time, for psychiatrists to say, look, don't despair. Your mother really didn't hate you that much, and even if she did, you'd be surprised. I got another 50 or 60 patients whose mother hated them even worse than you. Don't you feel better? The ability to metabolize any new medication that is outside the red circuit, that is above the red circuit, is sorely, sorely limited. It is unpredictable. The results are not necessarily long-lasting, like any medication. You can get off of it. It seems to wear off. But you remember, because this is not the last we'll be doing with this, that more and more, it's happened throughout history, but more and more you can see it, and more it has now specific importance to you and to whatever we do with this, that words are just like, they can be just like little pills of medication. I'll tell you a few more, to give you a little bitty starting points about words. Another way that you could attempt to neuralize on your own the difficulty in people metabolizing and being able to use new medication that's above the red circuit, that is, words. Is the blue circuit has got to be open in a particular manner. I'm not going to describe it, I'm leaving it. You can put that in quotation marks. That's what I was trying to get you to pursue. It's got to be open. Still relatively, even if you like it this way, unstable. For a new yellow circuit physic to be acceptable and useful. Believe it or not, that was fairly scientific. Of course, we're into my funny world of science, aren't we? Try it this way, then. If we're talking about ordinary people, it's a very thumbnail sketch, but it's based upon the reality, the scientific reality I just told you. People that apparently have emotional problems, as it's called, out in the wonderful ordinary world. Now, it sounds simple, but don't choke on it because you think it sounds self-evident. If they're too far gone, if they're too far sick, even psychiatry understands in some way, whatever definition, whatever approach one particular psychiatrist or psychologist might have, would say, this person, I've tried to talk to them, and there is no talking to them. They cannot take in and metabolize any new medication verbally. So everybody in here was sick emotionally when you came here. Everybody on the planet in a certain way you can say is sick in the blue circuit. Either that or they're working full-time for you-know-who. But the majority, to say the least, of the world's population feels as though they're emotionally disconcerted. There has to be, within certain limits, from being too far gone that you can't metabolize any new words, to being so chaotic that you can't even sit still and hear any new words. There has to be a kind of openness of a particular kind in there before any yellow circuit medication can be taken in and properly metabolized. You could also look along the lines that I was just talking about. You could look upon words in another way as being a kind of emotional catalyst. you should be able, I'm going to skip over a lot of this to let you fill it in before I ever get back to it. You ought to be able to fill in most of it so I don't have to come back. That words can apparently create passion. I say apparently because I know many of you thought in the past I pointed out that this seems to happen and it shouldn't happen. And of course that's true for the few people. Words can be like emotional missiles. If you don't believe it, just walk up to somebody at the street corner and say, "What say you, motherfucker?" Just words. "What's your mama doing tonight?" And apparently, just out of a clear blue sky, just you and one guy standing there, and just words came out right from the bailiwick of the yellow circuit, and suddenly you got passion in you, passion that was not present between you two, passion that was not observably present in him. How about faith healers? They're not a new phenomenon, but I've used this, I've drawn it up several times since all of you now have access in the privacy of your own condos to turn on TV and see them without going out to a sawdust tent anymore. That here are people that say, "I can't hear." And the man says, "Praise the gods, take away these evil, deafening spirits." And say, "Can you hear me?" The person says, "Yeah." Or somebody comes up on a crutch and they say, "God bless this person, throw in that crutch and walk." And the person walks and they swear, "I haven't walked in 10 years. All right, if I were to speak for the kind of voices that permeate most of the ordinary world of psychology or psychiatry, they would say if this phenomenon is worth observing, it has to do with some form between the poles of a kind of low-level hypnosis is going on under these conditions. It wavers between that and the fact, the other possibility, the person was psychosomatically deaf or crippled. That is, not physically, that there is something aside from the physical side of humanity that is the psychological side. So if indeed this person said, "The gods say, throw down your crutch and walk," and if indeed the person did it, and if indeed they had not walked in 10 years, and if indeed a medical doctor said, you can't walk and I don't know why, and they did walk, then that means in some way the whole ambiance of being in that circumstance, and this person, the apparent witch doctor, the healer, said these words, that it was beyond that. It was the whole milieu of the whole crowd. He'd been working the crowd up to a frenzy and hollering, "Do you believe that the gods will make deaf people hear?" And everybody hollers, "Yeah." "Do you believe that the gods can make lame people walk?" And everybody hollers, "Yeah." And they play some more music. Everybody screams and shouts, and he grabs somebody and says, "Do you believe it?" And they say, "Yeah." And he says, "All right, walk." Like they say, if they're going to use my terminology, all this is taking place on the blue circuit. All of you should be able to hear that. That's what they would say. But if that's true, let me ask you this. Could all that gone on with no noise? Now, I don't mean just the bass drum and the instruments playing. In some way, could that faith healer have come out and through gestures of some kind, try to motion, "Can you walk?" And the person they know, you say, like, place your rage, "How long?" And the person say, 10 years. And then they say, what I was getting at through all of that is that psychology, me speaking for the general approach they would have nowadays, was that all of this has to do with human emotion. And of course, everything has something to do with everything. But they would discount the words. They would say Well, it doesn't matter whether he said, hey, God tells you to walk. He could have just as easily said, Jehovah says to walk. Or he could just as easily said, Simon says to walk. Of course, I guess I pushed it. Me speaking for the general voice at the level of where psychology and that is in the body of life now, they would discount words, that was just almost meaningless. I mean, sure, people have to talk a little bit, but the thing about God said that he will cure those who believe in him. Do you believe that? And the person says, yes. Do you believe that if I pray for you in the name of our God, that he'll make you walk? Yes, I do. Walk. And the person walked. They would discount words. But after me going through all this, you would no longer discount words, would you? You can actually see words as not only being capable of being actual biochemical medication, not only as being emotional catalysts, you can see them as actual missiles. But then, hardwired people are almost bulletproof. Such as it's hard to heal people. It's hard to have ordinary people metabolize new verbal medicine. It is the general difficulty of what would appear to be verbal magic. It's not that it's impossible. And I don't mean just faith healing, other things that have crossed everyone's mind in here at one time or the other, that the more you understood about people, the more little tricks you picked up from all of this, in some way you'd get to the point that nobody could really get in your way. If you're having trouble with somebody at the office, with family, that you'd finally learn how to do tricks of some kind. And most of you felt as though there were some kind of vague spiritual or invisible tricks. But what if I narrowed it down and said, well, they got to start with verbal tricks, which is not true. What if I said that based upon what we're talking about tonight? Then you would have voices in all of you that would think, yeah, I used to dream about such things, and I still feel like there must be some validity to that. That if people are wired up and they're programmed a certain way, all I have to do is be able to see, get some notion of how they're wired up and programmed, and all I got to do is pull out the right words and talk to them, and I can make people who swear that they hate Italian food, I could make them beg and cry for lasagna. Or I could make a woman who says, I'm saving myself for the right man, I could say just the right thing and she would attack me. That there's got to be some way that words would plug in to the right place in somebody's program and make them do that, which by all appearances they say they will not do, make them agree to something that they say that they're opposed to, etc. It's not that that's not true, but there is a grave expense in trying to shoot people that are already wired up. It can be done, but people are almost bulletproof. It is certainly possible that you can apparently heal people, make them better physically, through ways that at least start out with words. Except once people are wired up, it is almost impossible, and forget them psychologically or otherwise. The total organism, it is almost impossible for it to metabolize any new yellow circuit medication. In a way, what little I've tried to hint and what little I've tried to say to some of you directly in the last few minutes, if there was such a thing as this, you could say it's almost a shame, which of course you can't say this, and I'm just running off in a parenthetical aside, that you can do things that are magical, but you have almost got to unwire somebody, deprogram them, and you can kill them in the process. Or it can take so long that they die of old age anyway. All of that is not necessarily literally the extent of what I mean, but there are costs involved, and I don't mean anything that's just obvious, that makes what appears to be verbal magic a very costly, even if you know what you're doing, proposition, and in rather random cases makes it very unpredictable, because people are almost bulletproof when you look at words as being ammunition, and they're almost incapable, a total organism, it's not some personality quirk of theirs, of them being able to metabolize any new medication going into the yellow circuit. And it has got to be able to take in the yellow circuit for there to be a real, anything resembling a cure. Or else you can be an ordinary person and talk and slap somebody and sing and dance and ask them if they believe and then say walk. Even though they use words, it was not yellow circuit medication. If it was ordinary, the person gets up and walks. Except, sad to say, you go over to their house 2 weeks later and they're back on their crutch. For it to really happen, a person has got to have an open end somewhere in the blue circuit loop. But it is not as simple as people want to believe about verbal magic. All right, I'll go ahead and cheat. I told you I was going to refer back to something at the tail end that I started in the beginning. So I guess you can suspect that I'm somewhere close for me to bring it up. And on that note, I think I'll stop. Well, move it just a little. So that they'll know it was cut. Okay, that's enough. Is the strength through diversity. Everybody on this planet, every culture, every person has been exposed, or I suggest to you that if it's possible for a person to grow up without a culture, which they can't, it's wired into you somewhere that you'd still come up with a notion. Or those of you that keep proper notes, the notion would still come up with you. Of heaven. Someplace, finally, of course it being after death works out just right. Since all ordinary people don't want to think about the alternative of what? No me. But the idea of heaven, being where everything is perfect, right? All confusion is gone, all conflict is gone. Now, like everything else, of course, there is a basis for this running through humanity's circuitry. There's something going on in life itself that amounts to, at the very least, of life talking to itself and it getting down to another level and it coming out as a notion of heaven, a place where everything is fixed. Since down here at line level, everything appears to be broke. But let me point out to you what heaven would actually be. It would be a one-world retreat of the impotent. The strength in diversity, and I'm just going to use some very quick descriptions because it's everywhere, but I was going to pick out the very bases that ordinary consciousness think support the things that need to be cured and corrected. That is the diversity of culture, of peoples, of religion, nationality. Now all of you were humane and sophisticated enough that long before you got involved with this, voices in you, and of course they're everywhere in life, many places, continually point out that if humanity is ever going to approach a true utopia or a true heaven on earth, we have got to stop these conflicts. And much of it appears, in the yellow circuits of many people, appears to be childish, incurable. Like, why in the world should two groups of people be fighting over something that they claim to be as holy as a religion? Or why should these groups of people be fighting because they're a different color? Why should they be fighting because one speaks one language and one another? And one of them celebrates a holy day on Thursday and another one on Friday afternoon between 7 and 8:30. Why? It just seems to be insane, says ordinary consciousness. That if there were a heaven, these are the very things that would no longer exist. It would be a one world, but it would be a one world retreat if they could do it. Not the reality of whatever it might be, but if they could suddenly impose it in some way, they would have a one world, as they imagine, retreat of the absolutely impotent. There are triads of conflict. Now, it can go so far, like everything else, as I've mentioned to you. I only got several notes regarding that. I thought more of you would get something out of that, of me pointing out how things seem to continually, from a reasonable, logical viewpoint, always go too far. How could somebody become a drunk and it take them 10 years to finally, maybe a doctor says, wait a minute, you telling me for the last 10 years you have drank over a fifth of gin a day? Yeah. Do you understand that you're a drunk? You've been a drunk for 10 years. Are you serious? Really, I am? And something, a logical voice would say, what kind of idiot is that? But notice life is continually, through people, apparently always staggering, is about to fall over in one direction and then seems to catch itself and go, my, I've had a flash of insight. Things always go, things consistently go too far from what would appear to be a yellow circuit level from the human viewpoint. This diversity has the inclination to continually break out of bounds, wherein the diversity becomes self-destructive, can become anarchy in a given locale. But then you're back to having to take a longer view of the continual dance of the triads, that there is no such thing as a permanent kinetic mode or a permanent recoiling mode or a permanent inert mode. But notice ordinary consciousness, including your own, believes that the very diversity that I'm telling you is the strength of life is looked at as being, per se, the enemy, the hindrance. That if we could erase all the conflict between groups of people that seem to be so irrational, we would have heaven. You'd have this infinitely large place, as the Baptists used to believe, floating up in the air. You'd be full, I guess, of albino, bald-headed, impotent, untalented, boring, feeble people that didn't like James Brown. In fact, I think I used to go with her. I would suggest you consider the one part I threw in, that there are a continuing, what could be described, I've never taken it to that level, of triads of conflict. That's the way it appears to ordinary consciousness, but if they could be stopped, if they could be rearranged, then you would indeed, in that locale, you would have man's idea of heaven. You would have a place that was self-destructive. You would have a place that would have no known direction. That's what I meant by anarchy. And you would have a place of absolute impotence. no strength, no growth. I got one I want to leave you with. We're back to one of the little things that I periodically do, as I guess you remember, is to point out something that happens in life, and I ask you what possible purpose could be being served. But it will not be anything obvious. You can't listen to any of your ordinary voices. But here's one that has been around as long as history has been around, and it is still common, still going on, and it is worldwide. Could call it the brother-in-law insult, which if you don't know what that is in certain parts of the world, one man will say to another, make some comment to him, and maybe end it or point to him, is my brother-in-law, which means I've been fucking your sister. Now why is it? What possible purpose could be being served all over the world that men take the act of having intercourse with a woman consistently as being an act, an insulting act? What possible purpose has been being served, and it's worldwide, goes across all cultures, that it is an insult? It's taken as an insult to state, to infer that I have had intercourse with a woman. It's an insulting act. You people on tape, you've had enough time. The story title task. I've got them all, as far as I know, back here tonight. David, you see to it that they get laid out front, and you people in other cities do what I'm about to describe. Now you take that title, and I want you to write me a page, or if you want to, a 2-page short story with that title. Remember, I told you I wanted you not to write anything until now, but to have already formulated the basis of the story, the outline of the story, or up here, if you had already written almost verbatim the story, that's all right. Put that title on the paper, and I want you to write a story with that title that has absolutely nothing to do with the story you had in mind. Absolutely nothing, but it's got to have some kind of relationship. That title is still the title of your story. But take that story you had and don't you use any aspect of it. And I want it in here next week.